Okay, so this is Adam House, and I am making my video for week 2 of Resisting Fascism in Global History, a 3,000 level college course in the history department. Um, and so I'm going to expand a little bit on what we talked about in week 1 and then go into some new material. Again, this is for my personal diary. This is not necessarily for public consumption, although I am making my videos public. Again, because I think that it is relevant to our current time that we live in. All right, so week 2 of Resisting Fascism in Global History, we get back into a little bit of continuing with what is fascism, trying to define what it is. A question was asked about if fascism tends to be more ideological, or is it actually more emotional, or maybe something altogether different, or some combination of major elements like this. So I don't have the exact wording of the way the question was asked in class, but I do have my answer. And I said that, and this is just very general, basic introduction to this idea, but I've learned that fascism tends to contain contradictory ideas, making it difficult to fasten a systematized ideology with any consistency. Now, the book that I'm in right now, I mentioned all 6 of the texts for this class last week. This is the text that we read for the first week, and got the first 5 chapters of it, which is over 90 pages. And the reason I answered the way that I did here about fascism having contradictory ideals, and therefore I think that makes it difficult to make the argument that it's primarily an ideology, and maybe has a lot more to do with emotionalism. Um, in the book, this author even states that the fascists, this is the people who invented fascism, the first fascists, that they tended to reject dogmas and ideologies. But at the same time, you have someone like Giovanni Gentile who attempted to systematize the ideology of fascism. So even when you're talking about what is fascism, you just continue with this theme of, like, there's contradictory themes within fascism. And we also see this manifest in the early fascist governments, whether we're talking about Germany, Italy, Spain, whatever. These countries, the fascist movements that rose in these countries, tended to have a very revolutionary flavor to them at first. An interesting fact here is that even a lot of the early fascists were originally socialists. They were kind of revolutionary socialists. Some of them got what's the word? They kind of disheartened, discouraged with socialism, and so then they were looking for other ideologies. They were looking for other answers, other paths, maybe even to get to some of the same goals that they might have had in mind with socialism. But now they're looking at, socialism doesn't really seem like it's going to hold, it's going to be able to deliver the promises that it makes. Or maybe they're just disillusioned with the socialist movements of the day and think that something else needs to be tried, presented to the public as a viable option for where do we go from here. Something interesting here is that the conditions for the rise of fascism tend to have a lot in common as well. Any example that we have of where fascist governments have arisen through our history, our world history, and some of those some of those conditions are things like there's been a great national tragedy or an emergency or some calamity of some sort, and the nation is trying to rally together. And like for the Nazis, this was after World War One. They're basically treated like the criminals of Europe, and so I think they feel very put upon. They feel victimized. The German people, they feel like they've been slighted. In fact, the Nazi rhetoric about what they called the international Jewish and international communist conspiracy, in their eyes, was that they were stabbed in the back. That was Hitler's lie. The stab in the back. That was the big lie of its day. The stab in the back of the international Jewish bankers, however you want to put that. That old conspiracy mindset about this little cabal of Jews that run the world, kind of thing. So anyway, you have the conditions of they feel slighted, and this helps to create an atmosphere for fascism to rise out of. People are holding resentment. They're feeling they're reacting, and so fascism is, at least to some extent, somewhat of a reactionary type of movement in nature. There also tends to be a general sense among the populace of disillusionment with democracy itself. You may hear a lot more than usual people talking about the failures of democracy to deliver on its promises. Promises of equality, promises of economic security, like sustained economic security. And if these kinds of promises that democracy kind of makes, in the case for democracy, why to have democracy, if it fails, then it begins to make a case for, well, what else could we try? What else could we do? So now, on a personal note here, I tend to be of the mind, very much, it's kind of cliche, so many people bring up this quote, but I think it's been attributed to Winston Churchill. Said something to the effect that democracy is the worst form of government except for all of the others. So, and that's very much kind of my attitude about democracy. Even the founding fathers of the American Constitutional Republic were not big fans of democracy. They definitely wanted to incorporate elements of democracy, and that's how we get the republic, because a republic is a more democratic style of government, and of course, since the founding of the United States of America, we've had periods in our history, some more so than others, where we've become more democratic over time. But that's kind of getting off into the weeds right now. Back to fascism. Another reason that I think fascism may tend to be more emotional even than it is ideological is the fact that it does tend to be reactionary in nature, and therefore relies on passions more than principles. Because we can see when fascism rises, the things that the movement, a fascist movement, claims that it cares so much about in its infancy, in its revolutionary infancy, those elements of its rhetoric, of its appeal, tend to get moderated if and when that fascist movement actually begins to accrue real power. So, um, and like most movements, like most political movements, they tend to, we tend to have we rise as a very radical movement in the streets, and by the time a given movement moves from the streets into the halls of power, it begins to become more moderated and more moderate. So, anyway, let's see, what else do we have here? Yeah, so the post-World War I Europeans may have seen democracy as outdated and ineffectual because it seemed to fail to deliver on many of its most hopeful promises. And authoritarianism is a broad term that could include an inclination towards authoritarian rule from practically any vein of political thought and governance. Fascism is a little more narrow than that. Authoritarianism is like this big umbrella, and most, if not all, abusive or tyrannical forms of government are, well, they're authoritarian. That's what they are. So now the authoritarianism can come in different forms, but authoritarianism, and I'm not going to try to define that term right now because that's kind of getting off into a whole other set of weeds there. But you can look up authoritarianism for yourself in the dictionary, whatnot, get an idea of what generally people, academics, are talking about when they say authoritarianism in its actual definition, and not used in some hyperbolic sense or as some kind of demagoguery or something. Authoritarianism can be communist, socialist, capitalist, right wing, left wing, okay? But fascism, like we said before, all Nazis are fascists, but not all fascists are Nazis. A Nazi is a form of fascist, but there are other types of fascists. And authoritarianism is kind of that even next level where we can say that all fascists are authoritarian, but not all authoritarians are fascists. So, but authoritarianism, when it manifests as fascism, has some similar traits across time and across examples. It does tend to have a nativist element, xenophobic element, ultra-nationalist element, tends to glorify violence and tends to glorify warfare, and there's typically this general sense of trying to toughen up the people, a kind of machismo, bravado. It's boisterous. It's blusterous. It's sometimes when I think about this, I have the vision of this little clip of Benito Mussolini. On in video, one of the clips that we have of him, and he's up in front of the crowd, and he's got his nose way up in the air, his chin way up in the air, and this very authoritative kind of look on his face and body language about him, and he just looks really, really smug. I mean, he just looks like he is completely full of himself. He is completely full of whatever it is that he thinks that is, his baby. So full of himself. I just should have stopped there. He just seems very full of himself, very pleased with himself, and just very smug overall. So anyway, I don't want to drag this video on too long. There's plenty of material here. Let's see. So we didn't really talk about this in class, but there was something else in class that kind of got me to remembering some things that I knew about fascist regimes, many fascist regimes. I've personally not studied every fascist regime that's ever been created, but I know some about several. And one of the things that I've noticed is there tends to be this fascism tends to rise from the folk. It's what the Germans called the folk and what the Nazis called the folk. And these were basically just the common people from the countryside. Um, and this is also who the black shirts were of Mussolini's group in Italy. They were the commoners from the countryside. So again, they kind of rise from the same class, the same circles of society that you might expect socialist movements to rise from, especially in 19th century Europe. But they tend to have this kind of flavor in common. Um, all right, so there's a book that is not one of our books for class, but that was referenced in class and was talked about as a book that could be assigned for this class and might be assigned for this class in a future iteration of the course by Robert Paxton. The book is called Anatomy of Fascism. So let me see, there's a couple of highlights here in this. Again, this is the book that I'm on right now. See if there's a couple of highlights, certain passages in here that kind of stood out to me. What is a fascist? So again, where does the word fascist come from? It meant a tightly bound bundle of rods, sometimes used as the handle for an axe. So it's supposed to symbolize authority and basically a unity of the people. But now you got to also remember, as time goes on, as these early fascist regimes come to power, that unity is very much oppressive in nature. When it matures, it becomes, oh, you may not have an individual sovereign will. You may not have autonomy. Everything is in the state. Everything is about the state. The state is primary, and the individual, your humanity, is barely an afterthought, if even an afterthought. You live for the state as everybody else does. So your life is all about the state. Let's see, what else? Yeah, we talked about fascism tends to have a revolutionary flavor in its infancy. It kind of becomes like its own religion. And that's interesting because some fascist movements have definitely leaned into the religious element and sometimes a mystical element. But I think it was, is it Franco's Phalange that were the ones that tried to incorporate the Catholic Church and use it basically as a tool to kind of buttress the fascist movement. Anyway, against foreigners, again, we're talking about, there's almost always this kind of xenophobic element, always an anti-immigrant kind of flavor to these fascist movements. Eugenics is another big piece of it, especially when you're talking about the Nazi Empire. They're famous for the eugenics. Um, Also, there are people who study fascism who say that the actual real first example we have of fascism very well may have been the Ku Klux Klan right here in America. Um, they have many of the same elements. They start out a small little group of veterans, which, war veterans, a little group of war veterans that tends to be pretty common for the beginnings of fascism and many other social and political movements, for that matter. But they start out as a small group of disgruntled Confederate war veterans, right here in Tennessee, actually, just down the road from me, about an hour or two here, in Pulaski, Tennessee, I believe it was on Christmas Day, 1865. So right after the Civil War, and Lincoln had already been assassinated for several months before that, and then so Andrew Johnson was president, and anyway, so the Klan has many elements. If you want to say that the Klan could not have been a fascist movement, that fascism did not exist yet, especially, you're going to say that if you're going to claim that Mussolini's black shirts were the first fascists, then obviously you can't have the Klan be considered fascist because they came decades before. But if the Klan was not fascist, then the Ku Klux Klan right here in the United States was definitely a forerunner to fascism. It was one of the things that fascism would very much emulate, and the kind of politics that fascism would grow out of. Also, conservatives tend to be collaborators. Unfortunately, a lot of times conservatives, they're trying to hold together their coalition. They get more scared of the left than they do the far right. And so then they continue to get pulled to the right. And next thing you know, the conservatives find themselves in a situation where if they break the coalition with the fascists, then they're putting their country, whatever country, plug in whatever country you want in the blank. They're concerned that if conservatives are concerned that if they break ranks with the fascists, then that's just going to create an opening that the left can take advantage of to take power. And so eventually it comes back to bite them every time. Appeasement does not stop fascism. All right, let me say that again, because that's important in this moment that we're living in right now, too. Appeasement does not stop fascism. Fascism can only be stopped by resistance. It has to be resisted, actively resisted. Okay, so so typically what happens with conservatives is by the time they realize that they're not going to escape the guillotine, they're not going to escape the police state, they're not going to escape the concentration camps or anything else any more than any other group is, it's too late. It's too late by that point. So the conservatives, they go along to get along, and then they still end up getting slaughtered in the end, just like everybody else. So, all right, so let's see. Page 64 of this book, I'm going to read one paragraph. Nazi radicalism was especially evident in the political sphere. The destruction of the rule of law meant not only arbitrary beatings, imprisonment in concentration camps, or execution, but the erosion of the very basis of rule-based government, justice, and administration. The civil service was purged, and the institutions of the party and SS became parallel administration, the personnel of which was recruited on the basis of ideology and service to the party rather than the procedures of the civil service. People of unconventional backgrounds rose into positions of influence. And just so you know, this book was written, this book about fascism was written and published, this particular edition published in 2014. So this is before the Trump era. But this was already understood about fascism. All right, so Nazi racial policies could not have been implemented without the assistance of non-Nazi institutions, especially the army, civil service, and academics. So they're kind of, these institutions, the military, the civil service, and the academics, or the college system, the universities, they really need to be on the front lines of resisting fascism. They're kind of your front line, the first bulwark against fascism. So let's see if I've got any more really good. That's more of a personal note there. All right, so I have already gone really long, so now let me just give you a couple things to think about here. This is about just some food for thought, exercise questions. So this is something for you to think about a little bit. What are our motives for resisting fascism? What is your motive for resisting fascism? What actions can you or could you take to resist fascism? How much risk do you run by resisting fascism? What is your risk assessment, your threat assessment? What support might you be able to secure in helping you to resist fascism? Where can you get support? Who and what, where, when, how, all of the above. Here's an important one. What is your vision for what comes next? After you resist fascism, granted, if you defeat fascism, what is your vision of what comes next? And how much value is there in resisting fascism? How can you, let's put it this way, how can you get the most bang for your buck, the most mileage for your fuel, kind of thing? So in resisting fascism, like anything else, we want to optimize our time, our resources, our energy, everything that we put towards resisting fascism. We want to be doing the most effective things that we possibly can at any given moment to resist fascism. All right, so I went really long this time. It seemed quick, but wow, there's so much more I could have gotten to, so much more that I have covered in this last week already. But that's it for now, and next week we'll have week 3 of resisting fascism throughout global history. As always, fuck Trump and fuck ICE.